She did not want power. She did not want money. She did not want to change the world. She wanted a child. In the years after the war, when medicine had learned how to save lives, but not how to grant them, Margaret Hale watched the future close in around her. Doctors told her nothing was wrong. Neighbors stopped asking. Time moved forward without permission, and every season made the silence in her home heavier. There are moments when desire hardens into something dangerous, not because it is selfish, but because it refuses to accept limits. For Margaret, that moment arrived quietly, carried by a story she was not meant to hear. A place whispered about rather than named. A town people did not recommend, but never denied. A solution that did not promise happiness, only results. She traveled alone. She did not tell her husband where she was going, because she did not know how to explain it without sounding foolish. The town was real, but it did not announce itself. No signs. No brochures. People there did not ask why she came. They only asked how long she intended to stay. What she was given was small, ordinary in appearance. A stone, dark and dense, cold even in warm hands. She was told it had fallen from the sky long before memory. She was told not to test it, not to study it, not to question what it would cost. Most importantly, she was told that what it answered would never arrive alone. The stone did not glow. It did not hum. It did not feel powerful. It felt final. Margaret returned home with it wrapped in cloth, as if secrecy could soften consequence. Within weeks, her body changed. Within months, her prayers were answered. The miracle came quietly, without spectacle. Friends called it luck. Her husband called it a blessing. Margaret did not correct them. The stone stayed. Years passed. The child grew. The household stabilized. If this story ended here, it would be about faith rewarded. But stories like this never end where relief begins. They end where patterns reveal themselves. Some curses do not strike immediately. They wait for moments when people believe the danger has passed. They collect time. They collect attachments. And then they begin to balance the account. This is not a story about magic that gives. It is a story about answers that arrive with a ledger, about how one desire altered a bloodline, about accidents that looked like coincidence, about sacrifice that appeared heroic until examined closely, and about a stone that did not follow a woman home. It followed her family forward. Margaret Hale was born in 1918, in a part of the country that measured life by endurance rather than opportunity. Her childhood was not tragic, just narrow. People stayed where they were born. They married young, worked hard, and accepted what life allowed them to keep. Dreams existed, but they were quiet and practical. She married Thomas Hale in her mid-20s. He was steady, precise, the kind of man who believed problems could be solved if approached correctly. Together, they built a modest life, a house that stayed warm in winter, meals taken at the same hour every evening, a future that felt solid until the years passed without change. At first, the absence of children felt like delay. Then it felt like inconvenience. Then it became something else entirely. Doctors ran tests and found nothing that required correction. They spoke gently, using words like sometimes and eventually. Margaret listened carefully, translating uncertainty into hope, because hope was easier to carry than finality. By her early 30s, conversations shifted. Friends stopped offering advice. Family stopped asking questions. Silence began to feel deliberate, as if acknowledging the issue would make it permanent. Margaret filled her time with routine, cleaning that did not need doing, errands taken slowly, evenings arranged around distraction. Desire, when ignored long enough, does not disappear. It reorganizes itself. Margaret began noticing stories, small ones, shared without ceremony. A woman who conceived unexpectedly after visiting a relative in another state. A couple who returned from a trip transformed, quieter but changed. The details never aligned, but the implication did. Solutions existed. They simply did not operate where rules applied. The town was mentioned once by accident, a name spoken too casually, followed by immediate correction. It's not a place for everyone. That was all the explanation offered. Margaret asked no further questions, but the words settled into her memory with unusual weight. She spent months convincing herself not to go. Reason came easily, fear came faster, but desire was patient. It waited until resistance grew tired. The decision was not dramatic. It did not feel reckless. It felt necessary. Margaret framed it as a final attempt, a way to exhaust hope properly so she could move on. She told Thomas she was visiting a cousin. The lie did not trouble her. It felt less dishonest than returning empty-handed again. The journey took her further than she expected. Roads narrowed. Directions became vague. When she arrived, there was no sense of arrival. The town existed without acknowledging itself. People went about their business without curiosity. No one asked who she was or why she had come. She was directed to a house that did not appear different from any other. Inside, she was not examined. She was not prayed over. She was asked only one thing: whether she was willing to accept an answer without understanding it. Margaret said yes. The stone was placed in her hands without ceremony. She was told it would work. She was told she would not like how it did. She was told never to return. And then she was sent home. Margaret did not feel different when she returned home. There was no immediate shift, no unmistakable sign that anything had been altered. The stone remained wrapped and hidden in the same place she had set it down upon arrival, as if movement might provoke attention. She told herself she would decide what to do with it later, when the weight of the journey had faded. Days passed, then weeks. The change announced itself subtly. Appetite first, sleep second. A heaviness that felt unfamiliar but not unpleasant. When the confirmation arrived, it was quiet, almost apologetic. The doctor smiled. Thomas laughed. Margaret nodded and said very little. The stone stayed. She did not display it. She did not mention it. She treated it like a private superstition rather than a turning point. In this way, it was allowed to become a part of the house without ever being acknowledged. Objects that are not named acquire influence easily. During the pregnancy, Margaret noticed small disturbances that she chose not to interpret. The stone was never where she remembered leaving it, though it never left the room. It felt warmer some days, colder on others. At night, She dreamed of standing still while something behind her adjusted its position. The child was born healthy, a boy. The room filled with voices and congratulations. Photographs were taken. Promises were made. Margaret held her son and felt a sense of completion she had never known. If there was a cost, she believed it would have arrived already, but nothing left. The first incident occurred a year later. Minor, easily dismissed. Thomas slipped while working on the back steps and broke his wrist. The fall was clumsy rather than severe. The explanation satisfied everyone. Accidents happened. The doctor agreed. Margaret remembered the warning she had been given. Not words exactly, more like an absence of reassurance. She did not say anything. As years passed, incidents accumulated without pattern. A fire that damaged only one room. A vehicle that stalled at the wrong moment but caused no harm. Near misses that seemed too precisely timed to feel random. Each was survivable. Each demanded nothing more than attention and repair. The stone remained silent. Margaret kept it close without touching it. She sensed that removal would register as refusal. The town had not offered protection from consequence, only redirection. What was once impossible had been made possible. Balance, she suspected, would follow its own schedule. Thomas noticed the change in her demeanor before he noticed anything else. She had become careful in a way that did not match anxiety. She listened more than she spoke. She stopped making plans that extended too far into the future. When asked why, she offered practical reasons that did not explain the restraint in her eyes. The boy grew strong, thoughtful, unusually attentive to danger. Margaret watched him with a devotion shaped by vigilance rather than joy. She loved him fiercely, but love had become something she rationed, as if excess might attract interest. Years passed without catastrophe. The household stabilized once again. Confidence returned. People spoke of luck, resilience, good fortune earned through patience. The stone waited. It did not demand blood immediately. It collected context. And when it finally moved to collect what it was owed, it chose a moment no one would question. The accident did not announce itself as tragedy. It arrived with the language of plausibility, the kind that closes conversations before they begin. Thomas Hale was riding home just after dusk when a truck ahead slowed unexpectedly. Witnesses would later say the road was damp, the curve was tight. No one questioned the sequence of events because the sequence explained itself. He died before the ambulance arrived. Margaret received the news without collapse. Grief came later, private and unobserved. In the moment, she experienced recognition rather than shock. This was how the account would be balanced, through events that fit comfortably inside other people's expectations. There was no investigation beyond the ordinary. Insurance was processed. Condolences followed their routine. Thomas was described as careful, unlucky, missed. No one suggested patterns. No one asked why misfortune had chosen that evening instead of another. Margaret did not argue. She returned home and stood in the room where the stone was kept. It had not moved. It did not need to. The exchange had begun, and there was no mechanism for reversal. She understood now why the town had insisted on silence. Words would not alter outcome. They would only announce resistance. The years that followed compressed into function. Margaret raised her son with precision rather than comfort. She taught him to notice details, to watch intersections, to listen before crossing thresholds. He absorbed caution not as fear, but as instinct. The boy grew into a young man without incident. His intelligence was sharp, his discipline exact. He left for training with resolve rather than excitement. Margaret watched him go without plea. She did not stop him, because stopping had never been an option. What had been set in motion would not be diverted by hope. War simplifies things. When death arrives in uniform, it carries explanation with it. Risk becomes communal. Loss becomes expected. When the letter came, it spoke of courage and timing and inevitability. It described an action that required no motive beyond necessity. He had moved without hesitation. He had shielded others without calculation. The family received a folded flag. Neighbors spoke of pride. Margaret thanked them. She placed the flag on a shelf and did not look at it again. Heroism, she understood, was only another acceptable shape consequence could take. The stone did not care how it was described, only that it concluded. Years earlier, she'd been warned not to ask for understanding. Now she understood why. Understanding would have required comparison. Comparison would have revealed that what appeared noble was simply precise. After the burial, Margaret returned home alone. The house felt lighter without voices. She noticed that the stone felt different, less dense, as if some internal pressure had been relieved. It had taken what it needed from this generation. The balance, for the moment, was restored. She did not destroy it. She did not attempt to remove it. Objects like this do not end because they are broken. They end because they are passed on. Margaret placed the stone back where it belonged and closed the room. She would not speak of it. She would not explain it. Silence, she had learned, was not avoidance. It was compliance. Time does not heal what it does not recognize. After the war, Margaret Hale lived quietly, her presence thinning inside the house as years accumulated without purpose. Grief did not overwhelm her. It settled. It became an arrangement she maintained rather than a wound that closed. The stone remained where it always had, unchanged in appearance, altered only in how it felt to be near it. The town where Margaret lived continued as towns do. Families changed. Children left. New names replaced old ones on mailboxes. Margaret became one of those women people spoke to gently, with caution and respect, as if fragility were contagious. She accepted this treatment without correction. What she did not accept was relief, because the stone did not rest. It had collected balance from one generation, and now it waited to be acknowledged by the next. Objects like this do not pursue victims. They invite proximity. They reward attachment. They depend on inheritance in its purest form. Margaret's son had not lived long enough to have children of his own, but Thomas had brothers, sisters. Blood does not restrict itself to intention. It recognizes lines. Small things began to surface again. A nephew injured during routine work. A cousin involved in an accident, described afterward as unavoidable. A sudden illness that progressed too quickly to manage. Each event stood on its own. No single incident suggested design. Together, they created a rhythm Margaret recognized immediately. She attended funerals with restraint. She said nothing. To speak would have been to point. To point would have attracted attention. The stone had taught her that visibility accelerated consequence. Margaret understood now that the warning had not been about protection. It had been about continuity. The town had not offered a solution. It had offered redistribution. What had once been impossible for her had become possible because the cost had been postponed, shifted forward into spaces where it could no longer be refused. The stone did not punish indiscriminately. It selected moments that made sense to others. An argument before a crash, a risky decision before a fall, a brave act before a death. Each consequence arrived wearing an explanation people were willing to accept. That was its genius. Margaret considered destruction, fire, burial, distance, but she had learned that absence could be interpreted as denial. The stone had not demanded worship. It had not required faith. It required acknowledgement through proximity. Removing it would register as challenge. So she did what the town had taught her. She allowed it to remain. She reduced interaction. She minimized attachment. She made herself small. Age arrived without negotiation. Margaret's health declined gradually, predictably. On the morning she realized she would not outlive the house, she did not feel fear. She felt obligation. Objects like the stone do not disappear simply because one caretaker is gone. They continue through transfer. She wrapped it carefully. She labeled nothing. She made no explanation. When family members arrived to manage the estate, the stone was treated as an heirloom without story, weight without context, exactly as it required. Margaret died without confession. Her silence preserved order, but it did not end the account. Silence never does. It only delays recognition. Inheritance is usually described as a transfer of value. Property, names, objects arranged with care. In families like the Hales, inheritance moved differently. It traveled without announcement, without guidance, and without consent. What was passed on was not wealth, but proximity. The stone remained among Margaret's belongings after her death. It was catalogued briefly, handled once, and stored again. No one felt compelled to examine it closely. Objects acquire authority when they carry age. People assume age implies meaning rather than risk. The next generation did not experience immediate loss. That is how the pattern survives. Consequence requires patience. It must allow normalcy to return so attachment can rebuild itself. The stone had learned this long before Margaret's lifetime. Years later, a relative's child kept it nearby out of curiosity. It fit easily in a coat pocket. It did not feel dangerous. It felt grounding, calm. The kind of object people carry during uncertainty without knowing why. The stone did not ask for belief. It asked for routine. Incidents resumed slowly. A fall described as clumsiness. A fire attributed to wiring. A sudden medical event explained through genetics rather than timing. Each occurrence arrived pre-labeled, requiring no analysis. People prefer explanations that protect their sense of order. Patterns only become visible when someone survives long enough to collect them. Those who grew up around the stone learned caution without instruction. They avoided roads at night. they hesitated before decisions that required bravery. Ironically, this did not protect them. It narrowed their lives until risk appeared only in moments where avoidance was impossible. That was the design. The stone did not hunt. It waited. It balanced when balance was available. It never exhausted the bloodline. It thinned it, enough to maintain equilibrium, enough to ensure remembrance without confession. Eventually, someone tried to discard it, not dramatically, not in rebellion, simply as an act of cleanliness. The stone was left behind, forgotten among items that did not matter. Within weeks, it returned to circulation, recovered by accident rather than intent. Objects like this resist finality. They re-enter systems through omission. The town that once facilitated the exchange never reappeared. Addresses led nowhere. Names produced no records. Either the place had changed, or it had been a threshold that closed once crossed. Solutions that require silence rarely remain accessible. What endured was repetition. When people later attempted to trace the family's history, they found no confession, no single point of origin. Only clusters of events that felt familiar without being identical. A tendency toward loss described as misfortune, a reputation for resilience. Survival praised without understanding its cost. The stone remained unnamed. It did not require ceremony. It did not require fear. It required only that someone keep it close enough for the account to continue. Years after Margaret Hale's death, the stone existed without legend. It sat among ordinary possessions, reduced to an object whose value was implied by age rather than function. People handled it without ceremony. No one warned them. No one could have, even if they wanted to. Language does not survive where explanation would imply responsibility. Those who carried the stone felt no immediate consequence. That was always the rule. Consequence that arrives too soon invites rejection. Consequence delayed becomes interpretation. People explain what they can endure. Over time, the family's history grew heavy with coincidence, not dramatic enough to provoke inquiry, not rare enough to feel random. The pattern never repeated exactly, which protected it from accusation. It only echoed, enough to keep memory alive without inviting confrontation. Eventually, someone noticed, not the cause, but the rhythm. Loss clustered near moments of confidence. Misfortune arrived after decisions that assumed safety. Courage preceded calamity. It was not malicious, it was corrective. By then, the origin was gone. The town had never been intended as a destination. It had functioned as a corridor, used briefly and then erased. Places like that do not advertise themselves, and they do not accept return visits. Once the exchange is complete, the mechanism closes. What remains is the misunderstanding. People believe curses are meant to punish. They imagine intent, morality, anger. But the stone never displayed emotion because emotion would imply preference. It did not care who suffered. It cared only that balance existed. Margaret Hale did not summon evil. She summoned permission. Permission for something older than consequence to rearrange outcome. When the stone answered her request, it did so efficiently. It gave her what she asked for. It took what it required. It did not negotiate. When the stone appears in the family's possession today, it looks inert. unremarkable. It does not radiate threat. It never has. Objects like this survive precisely because they do not announce themselves. They persist by remaining useful in moments of desperation. Someone, somewhere, will hold it again and feel steadied rather than afraid. They will not know why. They will not ask. They will believe they are acting freely, and the account will continue to adjust itself quietly, without spectacle. This is not a story about magic as power. It is a story about desire accepted without terms, because answers that arrive without explanation do not disappear when they are ignored. They move forward, they wait, they balance, and they never stop collecting. If you've listened this far, you already understand something most people don't. Some stories aren't warnings, they're records. If you've ever heard a similar story, a family pattern that never quite made sense, or an object passed down without explanation, write it in the comments. Sometimes the only way these things surface is when people compare what they thought was coincidence. Thank you for listening. More stories are coming.